You won't believe how one simple visit to a quiet local library turned into a moment that stayed with me far longer than I ever expected. Sometimes a single conversation can open a door inside your heart you didn't even know was locked. And this time, it was my cousin's grown son who said something I never forgot. "Tell me, from which cities are you all watching today? I love hearing where everyone is tuning in from. And if you're enjoying stories like this, please remember to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly helps us keep sharing moments that touch the heart." Now, let me take you back to the beginning. That morning started like any other, though the air felt heavier than usual, as if the sky itself was thinking too deeply. I had promised my cousin that I would spend some time with her son, Daniel, who, at 27 and working remote for a tech company, had come to stay with her for a few weeks. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he was a lanky teen, all elbows and shy glances. When he walked into my house that morning, tall, calm, and carrying a gentle confidence, I admit I felt a quiet surprise. He had grown into himself, yet still carried the same thoughtful way of observing the world. I suggested we visit the library together. It wasn't just any library. It was the small brick building tucked beside the park, with windows that seemed always full of light and shelves that smelled like old stories and patient time. It had become my quiet refuge in recent months, a place where my thoughts slowed down enough for me to hear myself again. Daniel agreed instantly, saying he had been wanting a quiet place to catch up on some reading for a project he was working on. His voice had a softness to it, steady but warm, the kind that makes you feel like you can speak honestly without being rushed. We walked into the library, and the familiar hush wrapped around us. There were only a few people scattered around, an older man flipping through a newspaper, a young woman arranging some books on a nearby shelf. The air smelled faintly of paper and the lavender spray the librarians used in the afternoons. It felt like stepping into a pocket of the world that didn't move at the same speed as everything outside. We found a table near the tall windows, the kind where the sunlight pools across the wood like melted gold. I watched Daniel as he settled into the seat across from me. He had the habit of pushing his hair back from his face every few minutes, not out of vanity, but as if his thoughts were always nudging him forward. I opened the book I had brought, but I found myself reading the same line 3 times. I could feel something stirring inside me, an awareness, not of him as a child I used to see once in a while, but as an adult with stories of his own. He was the one who broke the stillness first. "Auntie," he said, though he'd always called me that despite us technically not being aunt and nephew. "You come here often, don't you? You look like you belong in this quiet." I smiled at that. Is that a nice way of saying I look like someone who hides from the world? "No," he said softly. "It's a way of saying you look like someone who knows how to breathe." His words sat with me, stirring something gentle and unexpected. At 48, I had grown used to people seeing me as dependable, organized, practical. But rarely did anyone look closely enough to notice the parts of me that were still searching, learning, unfolding. His comment felt like a hand placed lightly on a closed door. I asked him what he was working on. He leaned back, resting his hands on the table. "I'm trying to write something meaningful," he said. "Something honest. But I think I've forgotten how to listen to myself." There was a quiet truth in his voice that made me sit a little straighter. I nodded, telling him I understood more than he might think. There were so many days when I felt like I had lost the map to my own thoughts, moving through routines without stopping to ask myself what I really wanted. Maybe that's why I came to the library so often. It was one of the few places where my mind softened enough to wander. For a moment, we simply sat there, sunlight stretching between us, pages fluttering lightly in the soft breeze from the nearby vent. And in that silence, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but like the faint click of a lock that had gone ignored for years. When he spoke again, his voice grew quieter, almost thoughtful. "You know," he said, "every time I come back here, you're the one person who makes me feel like I'm not completely lost." I felt the words sink into me with a warmth I hadn't expected. It wasn't romantic, nor was it meant to be. It was something deeper, an emotional honesty that felt rare, almost fragile. The kind of sentiment that makes you pause and look at a person differently, not in a way that crosses boundaries, but in a way that makes you wonder what parts of your presence reach people without you noticing. I closed my book, letting the sunlight touch the back of my hands. Maybe, I said, you're not lost at all. Maybe you just haven't noticed the path you're already on. He looked at me, then really looked, and I felt the moment settle around us like a soft echo. And that was the beginning, the quiet spark that would take the two of us through the next days in ways I had never anticipated. Not dramatic, not loud, but deeply human, deeply felt. When we left the library that afternoon, I didn't yet know how much his words would stay with me. But they did. And that day, without meaning to, he opened a place inside me I had almost forgotten existed. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I didn't plan to, but something in me felt restless, as if my thoughts had kept walking long after I had fallen asleep. I found myself replaying small moments from the day before, the way the sunlight had reflected in the library windows, the gentle sincerity in Daniel's voice, the unexpected comfort of being seen without having to explain myself. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a quiet shift inside me, like noticing the first breeze before a change in the weather. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat beside the kitchen window, watching the early traffic move slowly down the street. The cars looked like small, thoughtful creatures, all heading somewhere but not in a hurry. I wondered if Daniel felt the same lingering sense of reflection, or if our conversation had simply been one moment in his day, passing through him the way young people often let things drift without holding on to them. Not long after, my phone buzzed on the table. "Are you going to the library today?" The message was from him. A small warmth spread through me, not excitement, not anything inappropriate, just the simple affirmation that the connection I had felt the day before wasn't imagined. I replied that I was planning to go in the afternoon. His response came quickly. "Mind if I join you again?" There was no reason to say no, and truthfully, I didn't want to. I welcomed the company, maybe more than I had realized. By the time the afternoon sun softened into a warm gold, I arrived at the library. The familiar quiet greeted me as I stepped inside, but today it felt different, almost anticipatory. I chose a corner table this time, one where the view overlooked the small garden outside. A few minutes later, I saw Daniel walk in. He spotted me instantly, smiled, and made his way over. He sat down across from me, but there was something in his posture today, more grounded, more open. "Auntie," he said gently, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about noticing the path you're already on." I lifted my eyes from the book I hadn't really begun reading. "And?" He looked down for a moment, reflecting. "I think I've been wandering in circles because I keep comparing myself to some idea of who I should have become by now. And when I talked to you yesterday, it felt like I didn't have to pretend I had everything figured out." There was an honesty in his tone that tugged gently at my heart. Not in a romantic way, just a deeply human way. A way that reminded me how often people walk around carrying invisible weight, waiting for someone to ask how they're really doing. I closed my book and leaned forward slightly. We all feel that way at times. Even now, at my age, I still question things. But you have something many people spend years searching for. You're aware of your feelings. That's the beginning of real direction. He absorbed my words quietly, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The sounds of soft footsteps, distant page turning, and the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space around us. After a while, he reached into his bag and pulled out a notebook. "I'm trying to write again," he said, "but instead of focusing on something grand, I thought I'd start with something real, something simple." He hesitated before opening the notebook. I could see the uncertainty in his hands, the way his fingers lingered near the edges of the pages. "Would you read something I wrote?" he asked. I felt a small pulse of surprise. If you want me to. He nodded, then slid the notebook toward me. The page was filled with neat handwriting, a mixture of vulnerability and earnest intention. The piece wasn't long, but it carried a tone that felt familiar, quiet, thoughtful, searching. It was about feeling suspended between who he once was and who he hoped to become, unsure where to place his next step. When I finished reading, I lifted my eyes to meet his. This is honest, I said, and honest writing is rare. You're not trying to impress. You're trying to understand. That's powerful. He exhaled, the kind of breath that sounds like letting go of something tightly held. I didn't know if it was any good. It's more than good, I said softly. It's real. He held my gaze for a moment, and in the quiet of the library, something passed between us, something steady, respectful, and quietly meaningful. Not romantic desire, but mutual recognition. Two people at different stages of life, both trying to understand themselves a little better. The sunlight outside shifted, casting a soft glow across the table. A librarian walked by, arranging a cart of books. Everything around us moved gently, as if nothing wanted to disturb the moment. As we sat there, side by side but separated by years and life experience, I felt a sense of growth stirring within me. Not because he had said something extraordinary, but because I was learning how deeply a simple conversation can affect the heart when spoken with care. And I didn't yet know it, but the days ahead would reveal more than I expected, about him, about myself, and about the unexpected ways connection finds us when we're not looking for it. Over the next few days, our library visits became a quiet routine. Not planned, not arranged, just something that happened naturally. I would arrive with a book tucked under my arm, and somehow Daniel would appear not long after, carrying his notebook and that calm, searching expression that had started to feel familiar. It wasn't that we needed each other's company, but rather that the conversations we shared felt like small lanterns in a dim room, lighting corners neither of us had looked at in a while. On the third afternoon, a soft rain was falling when I walked to the library. The kind of rain that didn't rush but wandered down from the clouds as though it enjoyed the journey. The windows were fogged in gentle patches, and the air inside carried the comforting scent of damp coats and worn books. I found a table in the back corner, where the lamps cast a gentle amber glow across the wooden surface. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, shaking raindrops from his hair. His smile was brighter than the weather outside, easy and warm. "Looks like we both needed this place today," he said. I nodded. Some days the quiet is the only thing that makes sense. He pulled out his notebook, setting it down but not opening it. Instead, he looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "You've always seemed steady to me," he said, "but lately I've wondered, do you ever feel like you're carrying things alone, even when people think you're fine?" His question caught me off guard. It was rare for someone to ask me something so direct, so perceptive. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of his observation settle gently across my thoughts. "I think everyone carries things," I said, "but some of us just learned early on how to keep walking without letting others see the weight." He leaned forward slightly, listening in a way that felt genuine, not intrusive. "You don't have to do that around me," he said. "I'm not expecting you to be the person who always has it together." Something inside me eased at his words, like a tight knot loosening. "It's strange," I said softly. "I'm older than you, yet I feel like you're seeing things in me I haven't looked at in a long time." "It's easier to see clearly when you're not standing in your own story," he said with a gentle tone. "But I'm just trying to understand people better. Maybe myself too." A small smile touched my lips. "You're doing more than you think." He opened his notebook then, flipping to a page filled with new writing. "I wrote something last night. I didn't know who I was writing it for, but afterward I realized you crossed my mind a few times." I felt a soft warmth inside, nothing inappropriate, nothing crossing lines, just the quiet acknowledgement that our conversations had taken root somewhere meaningful. He handed the notebook to me. His writing this time was deeper, more anchored. He wrote about transitions in life, about standing between roads, unsure which one leads forward. He wrote about people who arrive unexpectedly and remind you that growth doesn't stop at any age. As I reached the final lines, I felt something shift inside me, as if a gentle truth had brushed against my heart. When I looked up, he was watching me carefully, not with expectation, but with hope that his words made sense. "This is beautiful," I said. "It feels like you're finding your voice." He let out a quiet breath. "I think I'm learning from you," he said. "Not because you try to teach anything, but because you speak in a way that makes me think about things differently." The rain outside softened to a whisper, tapping gently against the windows. The library felt even quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. I set the notebook down. "Daniel, you're giving yourself direction. If I'm helping at all, it's only because you're ready to hear your own thoughts now." He smiled, but there was something else in his eyes, something steady, appreciative, grounded. "You remind me that it's never too late to understand yourself better," he said, "and that means more than you know." His words settled in my chest, leaving a slow, warm echo. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone spoke to me with such calm sincerity. Not admiration, not dependence, just respect and a desire to connect in a meaningful way. We sat there for a while without speaking, letting the quiet fill the space between us. And in that silence, I felt something profound, the recognition that connection can happen at any stage in life, not because of age or circumstance, but because two people are willing to be honest in a world that often rushes past softness. When we finally stood to leave, the rain had stopped. The sidewalks shimmered with leftover droplets, catching the fading afternoon light. Daniel walked beside me, hands in his pockets, steps unhurried. "You know," he said softly, "these days with you, they're helping me more than I expected." I glanced at him, feeling that same gentle warmth again. "They're helping me too." And they were, more than I had realized until that moment. The days passed quietly, each one carrying a gentle rhythm. The library had become more than just a place for books. It had become a refuge, a space where conversation could flow naturally and hearts could quietly align in understanding. Daniel and I had settled into our visits without realizing it. There was no pressure, no expectation beyond the shared moments of reflection, laughter, and thoughtful silence. It was extraordinary in its simplicity. One late afternoon, the sunlight leaned low, spilling golden light across the wooden tables. I arrived first, as usual, and chose a seat by the window overlooking the garden. The leaves were turning, orange and amber, and a crisp breeze drifted in through the cracked window, carrying the faint scent of earth and rain. Daniel arrived shortly after, carrying his notebook and wearing a soft, contemplative smile. He sat across from me, placing the notebook gently on the table. There was a quiet confidence in him now that hadn't been there when he first arrived, an ease with himself, a sense of purpose. "I think I understand what you meant the first day," he said, "about noticing the path I'm already on." I tilted my head, curious. "And?" He smiled, eyes bright with something I recognized as clarity. "It's not about having everything figured out. It's about being honest with yourself and letting the small truths guide you. You showed me that even without trying. I just needed to hear it, in the right place, from someone who cared enough to notice." His words touched me deeply, and I felt a wave of gratitude for the unexpected bond that had formed. "I think you've always been capable of understanding yourself," I said softly. "Sometimes all we need is a mirror that shows us what we already have." We spent the next hour in quiet companionship. He wrote a little, I read a little, and we shared occasional comments on the books we loved or the little details of the day outside the window. the way sunlight shimmered across the rain-slicked leaves, the sound of a bird calling in the distance. It was ordinary, yet it felt sacred, this shared rhythm of thought and presence. As the library began to empty, I realized how much I had changed over the past days. I felt lighter, more open, more aware of the parts of myself that had been dormant or overlooked. I realized that growth isn't only for the young. It's a lifetime journey, and sometimes it is the quiet conversations and unexpected connections that guide us forward. Daniel closed his notebook and looked at me. "Thank you," he said simply. "For listening, for noticing, for being patient. I've learned more than I expected from these afternoons." I smiled, feeling the warmth of that acknowledgement settle in my chest. "And I've learned from you too," I admitted. About patience, about curiosity, about letting yourself be seen without judgment. We stood together, stretching and gathering our things. Outside, the sky had softened into pale shades of pink and lavender, the kind of evening that seems to hold the whole day in its arms before night falls. We walked toward the exit, the quiet of the library following us like a gentle echo. Before leaving, Daniel paused and looked back at me. "I hope we keep doing this," he said, "not just for the writing or the books, but because it matters." "It matters," I agreed. "It always will." We parted outside the library, stepping into the cool evening air. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. I watched him walk toward his car, carrying his notebook with a quiet sense of purpose I had never seen before. And in that moment, I understood something essential. Connection, respect, and honesty are the things that truly leave their mark on the heart, far more than words or deeds ever could alone. As I turned to head home, I felt a gentle satisfaction, a sense of peace that comes from knowing you have been seen, and that you, too, have seen someone else. The afternoons in the library had given me more than I expected. They had reminded me that life's quietest moments often hold the deepest lessons, and that we are never too old or too settled to discover parts of ourselves we didn't know existed. Later that evening, I sat in my favorite chair at home, a cup of tea warming my hands, and I thought of Daniel. His words, his presence, the unspoken understanding between us, they remained with me, soft but undeniable, like sunlight lingering on a cold morning. I realized that life has a way of surprising you, often in the smallest, most unassuming ways. And sometimes all it takes is a conversation, a moment of honesty, and someone willing to truly notice for your heart to open in ways you never imagined. And as I closed my eyes that night, I felt grateful. For the library, for the quiet afternoons, for Daniel's words, and for the gentle reminder that connection, understanding, and mutual respect are treasures we can carry with us always.